We moved to Connecticut the summer before I entered 6th grade in 2001. We moved into a beautiful new house in one of the most beautiful towns I'd ever seen. It was a bit more rural than we were used to in New Jersey, but it was an adjustment. My sister is 2 years younger than me and she was going into 4th grade at the time. We came from a neighborhood where we were all super close and everyone knew one another. Block parties every summer and kids running back and forth to one another's houses, and we were sad to leave it. Within the first few weeks we met some of our neighbors. Everyone was what we soon defined as very Connecticut. It was all a bit surface and nobody had that New Jersey warmth that we had been used to. In particular, our neighbors directly across the street seemed a bit odd. The mom would come over to vent to my mom about her sons and husband, and my mom was a sweetheart and was very welcoming and warm. The holidays came around and the neighbor boy across the street was in my sister's 4th grade class. My sister came back slightly alarmed with what had happened in class that day. The students were asked to make a Thanksgiving turkey out of a traced drawing of their hands. On each finger, they were supposed to write things that they were thankful for. The neighbor boy wrote things like, being a loser, hating myself, etc. Very, very dark things for a 4th grader. Fast forward to Christmas and my mom hears that they have nowhere to go for the holidays, so she politely invites the mother and 2 of her sons to our annual Christmas Eve party. The boys were so strange. They listened to Japanese techno with headphones on and didn't speak to anyone. They headed straight to our basement to play video games. It was weird. The younger one though was always much stranger than the older one, and the neighbor mom would always open up to my mom and aunt about how he would hurt himself, and how he needed to be put in special needs programs but that he could never quite be diagnosed. They thought that he was on the spectrum at first, but that quickly proved to not be the case. We always assumed that she'd been confiding in them because my aunt was experienced with special needs kids and that she was looking for advice from her. The Christmas Eve stands out to me because they were at our home in a very intimate setting, but we saw them on a daily basis. My sister and I would come home from school telling my mom about how weird the younger neighbor boy was and that something was just really off about him. I will never forget her telling us just to be nice to him and that we don't know what he's capable of. That struck me as so odd at the time, but we listened. I don't know if his mother told my mom something that scared her and made her say that, or if she just had a gut instinct. Recently after that, and I can't quite remember if this was in middle school or high school, I think I was in 9th grade, and my sister and young neighbor boy were in 7th, so we all rode the bus together. What my mom then said stuck out in my mind, so today I decided to be friendlier than usual. There was snow on the ground and the younger neighbor boy was drawing something in the snow and muttering to himself. I decided to greet him. "Hey Adam, what's going on? Nice morning today, huh?" He made no eye contact. "I'll bomb you," he said, still making no eye contact. We let it slide. We came home and told my mom. She reiterated, "Just be nice. We have no idea what this kid's capable of." Keep in mind, we were kids. We didn't know what to take seriously and what not to. I wished we had done more. Keep in mind, he wasn't someone who was bullied or made fun of. He was always off in the sense that he could not hold eye contact or hold a conversation or even a hello. Kids didn't make fun of him. He was a loner, but it seemed to be by choice. I never knew why we were cautious or afraid around him other than the fact that he showed zero warmth and zero humanity. We knew he had special needs, so we never really second-guessed anything and just tried to be polite as possible. When the bus would drop us off at all of our respective houses, he would run all the way up his driveway on the hill with his hands by his sides, and then would turn around and make this weird hiss noise at everyone, making claws with his hands. It was always so odd, but again, we were kids and there's always a couple of kids in school who are a little strange. We took it as just that. They were invited to several Christmas Eve parties, so memories kind of blend here. One year, the neighbor mom started screaming at my innocent grandmother for being a Yankees fan as she was a Red Sox fan. It was beyond strange because my grandma is the cutest little lady of all time and was in no way trying to argue over sports. It was though as the woman clearly had a weird switch go off. She was always nice to me, but I'll be honest, we always rolled our eyes every single time my mom invited them over. It was always such forced conversations with her, And as a teenager, I wanted nothing to do with being cornered into another chat. I think she must have just been lonely. The following and final year they were invited to Christmas Eve was when she got into it with my mom about having guns in the house. The boys only attended the first couple of Christmas Eves, so it was just the mom this time around. The topic of guns came up. The neighbor mom started telling my mom about how she has guns in the house and how she takes her younger son to the shooting range all the time. My mom said that she didn't agree with having guns in the house. She wasn't trying to argue, but the neighbor mom got out of hand about it, very defensive and ultimately getting aggressive about how she grew up in New Hampshire and that's just the way of life out there. The neighbor mom told us about how brilliant that her younger son was, and that he hacked into some of the government's highest levels of security and that the CIA showed up on his doorstep. We have absolutely no idea if this story is true or not, but this is what she told us, so it became our ongoing joke when anything strange happened at our house. There were a few odd things that happened throughout the years. Our internet had clearly been messed with, lights would flicker in the house, and we would joke that it was the younger boy each time. It wasn't until December 14th, 2012, that we knew just what he was capable of. I was out of college working outside of Philadelphia, my sister still a student in college, and my youngest brother a student at the high school. It was the worst day of all of our lives. My dad heard the gunshots in the morning that killed the neighbor mom, Nancy Lanza. He assumed it had been a hunter in the area, maybe a little closer than usual. That is until the FBI showed up and had to evacuate the house as snipers had lined our driveway. My mom was at the mall and we were all frantically calling one another as the news slowly broke throughout the day. At first they had his identity all wrong and said it was his brother, but we knew it had to have been him. Thank God for my mom making sure we were as nice as possible, although I don't know that it would have stopped him. I wish we had done more at the time. I wish we knew to do more at the time. We didn't. We didn't want to assume the worst out of someone, but I wish we had. Approximately 20 students and 6 teachers were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School that day. The worst act of evil I have ever experienced so directly in my life, and I hope I will never experience again. I'm very thankful that we survived growing up across the street from him, but I'm so gutted for those who didn't get so lucky. These were kids, little kids, in a place that should have been the safest haven for them in their youth. I hate it so much. I know I will never see him again, but regardless, Adam Lanza, you sick and twisted individual, I pray and hope to God that we never see you again.
I used to work at a 24-hour McDonald's during my first year of college, right in the town where I grew up. I was 18 at the time, and I'm still a petite girl. Our store owners were greedy scumbags, so for our large city, we were the only McD's staying open for Christmas, so I switched around on the schedule that I'd come in after family stuff on Christmas Eve, and be home in the morning to open presents and then sleep. Somewhere around midnight, a mid-20s man came in. He was slightly overweight, tall. His clothes kind of fit in an awkward way that's hard to describe, like he wore the same things every day and put zero thought into his appearance. The way his shirt was tucked in, the way his belt bunched his pants, that his pants were a bit too short and showed too much ankle. His beard was patchy and uneven and grew down his neck, and you might wonder why I have such a thorough description of him, because he stayed in the dining room for at least 2 hours within sight of the counter, and almost every time I checked he was staring at me. He would come back to the counter at least twice or more to order additional small items off the value menu. After the second time I caught him staring again, and he gave me a creepy smile while he still had food in his mouth. I'm bad at hiding my facial expressions, and I'm sure I wrinkled up in a disgusting face and turned away to go to the back. I told the one guy on our skeleton crew that night that some lingering dude was creeping me out and asked him to switch with me on the front. It was a pretty dead night, so it really didn't matter where we were stationed, so he switched with me. After a bit in the back, it was normally the time that night shift would clean the customer areas for a jump on the next day before morning rush started. My coworkers said the dude was still out there, so I asked to clean the bathrooms instead, while he wiped down the tables, and then we'd tackle the floor together so it was quick. I started in the men's bathroom since the only guy in the place was currently at his table. But just to be sure, of course, I knocked on the door first, then called out to anyone inside that it was time for cleaning. It's not a glamorous job to clean a bathroom, but it had been a quiet night, so it wasn't that bad. Then I did the same knock to check to start cleaning the women's bathroom. It was a bit of a maneuver both times to bring in the mop bucket and the tote with the cleaning supplies, so I was a bit distracted when I came in and went to place the tote on the sink counter, which is probably why I didn't notice the shadow in the stall closet to the sink. I was pulling items out of the tote right away when I kinda noticed movement in the mirror behind me and looked up to see Creepy Guy almost fully behind me, only seconds before his hand closed on my arm. He was grinning in a way that made me feel sick right away. He pulled my upper arm in a way that made me turn around towards him, and he must have seen my face screw up as I took a deep breath because he started to try and cover my mouth with his other hand, saying something like, "Don't. No, it's okay. I think you're pretty." Not sure exactly what he was saying because I was already screaming at the top of my lungs and turning my mouth and body away from him as much as I could. With my free arm, I started whacking him with the first thing my fingers touched, which happened to be a bottle of glass cleaner. It seemed like it only took seconds for my male coworker to burst in the door. He took one look at the man in the bathroom and started screaming at him too, telling him he can't be in there, calling him a sicko, trash, scumbag, among other more colorful words. The creeper dashed for the door, trying to squeeze by my coworker who stayed with me down the short hallway, continuing to yell at him, and kept it up till Creeper was all the way out the door, and a minute later, a car sped out of the parking lot. We called the cops, statements were taken, managers contacted. I went home early and quit soon after, as I was always scared he'd show up again, or try to grab me on my way to my car, or even follow me home. So, Christmas McCreep, let's not meet again.
So for context, I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I also drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was out driving for Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing really special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It happened to be a pickup from this kinda lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive, find my passenger, and he has all of his belongings with him, like several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not really too big. We get all of his stuff loaded up, barely, and we're on our way. Now, during the ride, the guy was crying and saying that his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had apparently walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because her name was on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now in my city, we happen to have a street that is pretty well known for having vices. Hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels. You know, the works. We get to the motel and he asked me to wait for him to check in and get his key. "No problem, man," I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as having people trying to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But like I said, stories for another time. This motel was on that street that I had mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed right out against the building. And I'm a pretty big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload his stuff. While on my second trip getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just south of my car, then followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to. One of the ladies then pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I then saw the guy raise a fucking shotgun right out of his long coat and then storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, then slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was honestly just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice that he took the boxes out of my hands or slid a $5 bill in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least go to where I could get my gun. I know that the guy and the ladies both saw me, and I know that they knew I saw the gun. I just had to get the fuck out of there. You know how it goes. No witnesses. I got in my car and then sped away as quickly as possible. I got a block or so away and then called the cops. I gave them every detail I could. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a lift. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunmen or the women. They never answered the door that I saw them come out of. And the occupants of the room they went into said nothing happened and that I was full of shit. Well, I definitely wasn't. I know what I saw. So this happened last year, the week before Christmas. I was 13 years old when this took place. Now, this isn't really as scary as some of the other stories submitted, but it's still pretty unsettling. On this day, I decided to hang out at my mom's workplace, as she owns a small business with no other employees. For some backstory, the area where she's located in isn't really the best. It's pretty much known for drug addicts. The tenants in the building 2 doors down from us actually got evicted for destroying and building and creating a living space for drug addicts and homeless people. They found beds and makeshift showers in there. Anyways, it was around 5 p.m. and clients were coming in and out. Then this guy walked near the large window in the front. Now, he stood there for a while, and I didn't really think too much of it since there's always homeless people roaming around the center. I went to the back to go sit when I then heard the door open. My mom asked if this person needed anything. This raised some red flags since the person never answered the question. I got up to see who it was. The wall was set up so that I could see them, but they couldn't see me. I saw this 6-foot-something white guy just standing there. He was really dirty, and his clothes were all torn up. My mom kept asking this guy questions, but he never answered. He just stood there, staring at her. I was literally shaking. I don't know how to explain it, but the way that he was staring, it just seemed threatening. She threatened to call the police. Nothing. I started recording just in case something happened. She ended up calling the police as well as my dad. The police showed up right in time as the guy then started grabbing his bag for something. They searched the man and they found 2 large knives as well as some really hard drugs in the bag. The guy was obviously arrested, but I'm not really sure what happened to him afterwards. Although nothing insanely really bad happened, I don't really want to think about what would have happened if the police didn't arrive on time. We got lucky. I'm a 30-year-old female, and I'm a current student in nursing. 2020 Thanksgiving went from really exciting to creepy for me. It all started off with me passing an exam at 86% and spending a pre-Thanksgiving with my boyfriend and his family. This particular night right before Thanksgiving, I spent at my brother's house. I left for home around 8 a.m. I woke up exhausted, but my mental state turned manic. I was awake, and I was wanting to give my sister a surprise gift for me and her kids. Because she hadn't replied yet, in my manic state, I decided to go to her house. The day was fun. A lot of food, booze, and dancing. I loved it. At around 6 p.m., I had planned my trip out to my boyfriend's temp house. We got into a bit of an argument, as I told him since it was a 3-hour drive, I'd start around 1 a.m. He didn't really agree with this, as he thought it would be too late and dark to travel to a rural area, which prompted me to remind him I'm grown, which was a bit of a mistake on my part. He became a bit annoyed and upset. However, we later agreed on my arrival. The festives went on at my sister's. Alcohol fun, Thanksgiving family pictures, and a lot of food. Around 11 p.m., I decided to take a nap. However, my manic brain thought to shower. Due to me needing help with running the shower and attempts to fix my hair, I ended up laying down around midnight. I had set an alarm to wake up at 1 a.m., but of course, I slept through it. I was woken up at 3:30 a.m. when my sister then asked me, "Why didn't you leave?" I woke up and desperately moved as fast as I could out of her house. I left my phone and I had to turn around and go back. Once I retrieved the phone, I was finally on my way for a second time. I ended up going in the wrong way, as I mixed up 2 cities' names because they both started with CH. Once the GPS was on and I realized I was going in the wrong direction, I was on my way. Once leaving the city lines of Sacramento, I got into a race with a Silverado that was lifted. In my jealousy that I was in an SUV versus a really beautiful truck, I decided to take on the race. That is, until I reached 120 miles per hour for about 10 minutes and decided it wasn't worth the ticket. At the time, it was only me, the Silverado, and a fellow Ford on the road. About 5 minutes later, the Silverado took an exit. Now it was only me and the fellow Ford in a rural dark area. During the drive, I had noticed the Ford was on the side of me, and at one point they seemed to be close enough right on my right side to swipe me. Due to my blindness in the dark, I was way more focused on making it safely that seemed to even cut off other cars to be on the side of me. We made it to a small town, which meant taking a major street for about 3 to 5 miles, just going through stoplights. At one point I thought, damn, I really hate when people are so close to me like that. It was really annoying to me, but after 2 lights, the fellow Ford turned off, and I honestly felt a bit childish for even caring. 2 to 3 lights down as I made it through the green light, I noticed a car turning onto the street. It was the same car. At this point, my body started to shake as the car made sure it was back on the right side of me, keeping up with persistence this time. My head began to hurt, and at first, I don't think I understood that fear was kicking in. Why would this car come back to the main street? There's only 3 other cars, and he's the one on the side of me. The fight or flight response began to creep up on me, and I didn't want to turn my head as if I noticed. In that moment, I didn't want to call my boyfriend. What if I'm just paranoid? I mean, I've traveled alone for longer distances at night before. Is alcohol still in my system? My boyfriend and mom will lose it if I call them. Why is this happening? In that moment, I saw a light turning yellow as we approached side by side. My brain went into rationalization, and I thought, do not panic, stay calm, ignore the headache. When the light turns green, stay, see if he goes. We approached the light and then stopped. The light seemed to be much longer than the others. I moved my eyes towards the fellow Ford on the side of me. The windows were lightly tinted, but I could see a hat and a person looking towards me. Then seconds later, look up at the light and then peer back into my passenger window. My head and my heart began to become one, both in pain and fear. Then the light turned green. There were 2 cars behind us, but I stayed on my brakes. I didn't move, and I didn't see his car enter the intersection either. I turned my head to look, and I could now see more of the silhouette of the man's face under the hat staring at me. I took off slowly to collect my composure and not seem to be scared, keeping my pace of slowly going through the intersection. I heard a car behind us beep the horn, and it was like a light switch. I noticed a truck in the distance through the last light that was making it through the abyss of the rural highway that was only a 1-lane road. I decided to speed up to make the last light, but so did the fellow Ford, keeping up with my pace. It seemed that he was trying to cut me off, but I went from 45 to 65. The trucks were going slow, and now he was behind me and so close that I could see his lights in full. In a panic, I went off the side of the road as to pull off to pass up the truck, and so did he. When I noticed he passed the truck and was still just as close behind, I noticed the second truck. I sped up to 90 miles per hour and went towards the left, which was into incoming traffic, to cut off the truck. My rationalization was to speed, and even if I was pulled over, I'd be safe. I hoped anyways. I cut off the big rig truck and began to speed up. Now able to see far behind me in the distance through my rearview mirrors, I could see the car trying to cut off the truck to the right and left. But cars were oncoming in the opposite lane, and due to trees to the right, the Ford seemed to weave in and out of the lane. He was trying to erratically cut off the truck. By now, even the truck lights were far behind me. I was going about 120 miles per hour and continued it with no effort, as I'm experienced with driving fast and my adrenaline to flight made it easy. After about 5 to 10 minutes, I slowed down to 80 miles per hour and then to 65 miles per hour after about 30 minutes. An hour later, I stopped at a store that appeared to have many customers, which prompted me to stop, as I was paranoid and couldn't be 100% sure the fellow Ford wasn't near me. I went into the store to grab food and coffee, but my appetite was gone, so I just decided on coffee and a smoke. Walking into the store, I saw both customers and employees give me a wide-eyed look, followed with a look of sorrow, which made me feel embarrassed. I was shaking really badly, and my makeup had run all over my face from the crying, and I'm sure I looked like I was coming off of drugs from the fact that my sympathetic nerve was transferring its hard work over to the parasympathetic nerve. In other words, my body was coming off the adrenaline. I went to pay for my coffee and request smokes, but the shaking made it really hard for me to enter my PIN for my debit card. I actually had to try like 3 times. Back to the car I went in fear. My head pounded into my ears. I hoped some tobacco would calm me. The smoke seemed to help calm me down slightly, but the shaking and headache persisted in a bearable manner. The sun was now coming up, and I was almost there. I was still shaking and still upset, and crying on and off. Of course, when I finally made it to my boyfriend's, he could sense it and was able to get the truth out of me. I could see he was upset, but he had tried to console me with a hug and kiss, and encouraging I rest so I could calm down. It was really hard to study that day. The headache really persisted, and I stayed in bed. My boyfriend made the decision for me to not take any more late night drives, and even made sure that I stayed in his dwellings until he was off and with me. It's now days later, and it's dark out, and I'm scared to go out. I really wish I would have listened. 30 years old or not, no person, male or female, should ever think it's okay to drive into rural areas at night. There really are some crazies out there.
So this happened all the way back in the late 1990s when I was a college sophomore. Me and the girl I was dating at the time had been going steady for about 8 months, and since she was my first real girlfriend, my mom was pretty keen to meet her. And what better time than the holidays to introduce her to the folks? During the week before Christmas, my mom's family traditionally held quite a large gathering up at my uncle's place over in Sandy, in my home state of Oregon. Pretty much all my extended family head out there year after year from all over the Portland area, and since they've gotten word that I was bringing my girlfriend, the hype to meet her was huge. I won't lie, I was kind of nervous that they'd embarrass me in front of her, but that anxiety was totally misplaced. She got along really well with all of them, and despite some playful humiliation when a cousin of mine told her the story of how I literally peed my pants at the Haunted Mansion ride when I was a kid, they were a credit to me. And when it came to driving her back home, she seemed to be more into me than ever. We'd agreed to drive back down to Eugene at like 7 p.m. so I wouldn't be too tired driving back. But since we had such a good time, we stayed way later than we had planned to, and didn't get on the road until about 10:30 p.m. that evening. In the hopes of making the journey a little faster, I ended up taking the OR211 instead of just sticking to the I-5S for the whole drive. Annoyingly, this didn't quite actually make the journey any faster, but point being, the OR211 was pretty much surrounded by farms or these huge swaths of dense pine forest. So as you can imagine, big stretches of it aren't lit very well at all, and for some parts of the drive, we were moving through complete darkness, saved only by our car's headlights. But honestly, I wasn't all worried about it. I was pretty good at reading a map, and once I was back on the I-5, a road I knew pretty well, I figured everything would be all good. So we're just cruising along, in high spirits, talking about how goofy some of my family were, but generally my girlfriend was singing their praises and telling how she couldn't wait to meet them again. It's right around then that we hit a section of the highway that descends down this big old hill, heading up to the bridge crossing over Deep Creek. There, the highway is sandwiched by some of the densest forests you've ever likely seen, and there is absolutely nothing lighting up the highway. It's the only thing we can see from the front seats of the cars, like maybe 20 or 30 feet that our headlights are illuminating, and pretty much nothing else. But like I said, we're in high spirits, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Right as the highway was starting to level off, something darts across the front of us so fast and so suddenly that I barely missed smashing into it. I brake so hard that I almost gave the pair of us whiplash. Then, when we're stopped, both me and my girlfriend are in a complete frenzy of, "Oh God, did you see that? What was that?" There are plenty of deer in that area of Oregon, plenty of coyotes too, but the thing that ran out in front of us was way too big to be a coyote, and something about the way it moved gave me this gut feeling that it wasn't a deer either. The shape was just way too slender, almost like whatever was out there had moved on 2 legs, not 4. Now next thing, I know how completely dumb this sounds in retrospect, but my curiosity just got the better of me and I decided I wanted to investigate. So again, this was also incredibly dumb. I turned the car like 90 degrees in the highway so I could point our headlights into the woods. Yes, this could have caused a horrible accident if another car had come along at the same time I was doing this, but I don't think I was thinking straight at the time. You see, as a kid growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I've heard a lot of stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and I'd be lying if I said that they didn't capture my imagination. No, I'm not saying that I thought I'd caught a glimpse of Gigantopithecus or anything. I know the stories are mostly exactly that, just stories, but a part of me just wanted to be sure. So like I said, I turned the car 90 degrees, turned on the high beams, and stepped out of the driver's side and onto the highway. I stare off into the trees for a minute or two, but I don't see a thing. Nothing is moving out there, and the whole scene was as quiet as the grave. But as I'm looking, I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach, and start to feel as if though I'd made a huge error of judgment. It was one of the most intensely terrifying feelings I'd ever felt in my entire life, a feeling like I was being watched by something predatory. I know it's a huge cliche, and the whole "I felt like I was being watched" thing is such a tired old trope, but I don't really know any other way to phrase it. My heart was pounding, the hairs on the back of my neck are standing on end, and my gut just turned to ice. So without turning my back to the woods, where I expected the danger to come from, I started edging back towards the car. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, I practically jump out of my skin when I hear the car's horn letting off one long, excruciatingly loud, extended blast. I mean, it scared me so bad that I almost straight up peed my pants, Haunted Mansion style. My first thought was that my girlfriend had ended up leaning on the horn as she climbed over into the driver's seat for some reason, because she'd done that once or twice before. But as I turn back around, I can see she's still on the passenger side, but that she's actually leaning over to push the horn, in what was evidently a frenzied attempt to get my attention. I run back to the car and ask her if she's okay, but she doesn't say a single word to me. She just points off to a spot about 50 feet away from where we parked. I spin my head around to see what she's pointing at, and that's when I see it. What was, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that had run in front of our car just a few minutes prior. Lit up by the residual light of our high beams, what I saw was really obviously a man. but he was covered in animal furs. What looked like a mishmash of deer skins, bear skins, and elk skins, and on his head, secured in a way I'm not even sure of, were these antlers. At the time, because of how closely it was to the holidays, I remember the words reindeer man just flashed into my mind. Maybe in the naive hope that the dude was dressed that way out of some misdirected festive spirit. But he certainly didn't seem in any kind of festive spirit, not in the least bit. Like I couldn't see his eyes because of the weird kind of head covering he had on, but I could see his mouth, and at first he kind of looked like he was giving us a smile. Only as I looked, I could see it wasn't a smile at all. This guy was just baring his teeth to us, like the way chimps do as some kind of warning. After that, he turned and walked off into the forest, never to be seen again. Obviously, right after that, me and my girlfriend just got out of there and got back onto the roads towards the I-5. It took us both a while to calm our nerves, but my girlfriend was particularly shaken up, and that's because she'd seen something that I hadn't. And as we drove on, she explained exactly what that was. While I'd been staring off into the woods, looking for Sasquatch or whatever, she'd noticed him out of her peripheral vision, but was basically frozen in fear for a moment or two as she watched him walking slowly towards me. Or rather, walking isn't the right word. From how she described it, this guy was stalking, the way a hunter might stalk a deer. The way she puts it, she had to summon up pretty much all of her courage to be able to lean over and honk the horn the way she did. Then when Reindeer Man had heard the honking, he backed off a little before I saw him, and like I said, he kind of just froze in place before disappearing. I did a fair amount of online research when I got home to try and find out if anyone else had any run-ins with this guy, but there was absolutely nothing online about him. There are plenty of crazy survivalist types up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm guessing he was one of those, but they tend to be pretty open about their existence, sometimes even advertise themselves as militiamen or whatever, whereas the Reindeer Man seemed like he was living completely off the grid. I don't live in Oregon anymore. Me and my girlfriend during the encounter broke up at the end of college, but when we were still together and I happened to be driving down towards Eugene, I always avoided the stretch of highway that I saw the Reindeer Man on. I've told this story a lot over the years, and some people honestly just think I'm making it up as like a campfire tale or something. But it's not a tale. It's not made up. And it's definitely not just intended to be some dumb spoopy story. It's most definitely a warning to anyone traveling on that road at night, because if my girlfriend wasn't with me when he ran out in front of the car, if she wasn't there to spot him before he crept up on me, only to scare him off with a blast of the horn, I honestly might not be here to warn you guys. So please, this holiday season, drive careful, drive slow, and do not stop for any reason on dark, deserted stretches of forest highway. During college Christmas break of 2016, I had traveled all the way back to Pennsylvania from California to spend the holidays with my parents. It was kind of weird going from being a mostly independent college kid in a place that hardly ever gets cold to going back to living in my childhood bedroom in a state that becomes a legit winter wonderland around December and January. But I love my mom and dad, and I don't care how much the flight costs. There was no way I was going to spend the holidays alone in Cali. So anyway, my old room is on the second floor of the house, directly above the sliding door that heads out onto the decking in our backyard. It's a really heavy door, so anytime someone opens or closes it, it rumbles right up into my bedroom. This was in a house that was built back in the 50s too, so as you can imagine, the whole place has a lot of creaks and groans to it, but is otherwise pretty sturdy. I should also add at this point that part of the town that my parents live at is pretty safe, with a relatively low crime rate, especially to that of nearby Philly. The most intrusive calls they ever got tended to be from magazine salespeople and the odd Jehovah's Witnesses, and after my dad insisted on debating scripture with them, they stopped calling altogether. Point being, they never had anything remotely close to any kind of break-in or home invasion for the entire time they were living in that property. Next thing is a brief confession from myself here. I picked up a pretty horrible smoking habit during my freshman year of college, so whenever my parents went to bed, I tended to stay up late playing Civ on my laptop, sitting next to my open bedroom window while I smoked and drank tumblers of scotch that I'd pilfered from my dad's liquor cabinet. After midnight, I'd have my window open from anything of 30 minutes to 2 hours. I mean, it would purely depend on how cold it was outside or how tired I was, but I generally let the room air out before spraying some air freshener so that the tobacco smell didn't cling to anything too bad. I also had to use headphones to watch TV and listen to music so it wouldn't wake my mom and dad up. But I tend to only ever use one earphone so I could keep an ear out for anyone coming down the hallway, since they really wouldn't be happy if they found I was smoking in the house. So one night, I was in my usual routine of conquering the known world in an online multiplayer game of Civ when our house alarm suddenly starts blaring. I don't think I'd heard that thing since I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I had completely forgotten about how loud it was. So hearing it had me practically filling my underwear from being frightened out of my skin. Point being, everyone in the house is now wide awake and ready to head off whatever is about to go down. Now my priorities might sound way off here, but initially my big worry wasn't so much that something bad might be happening, like a home invasion or something like that. It was more like me being terrified that my parents were about to realize I'd been smoking and stealing booze from them. I was 20 years old at the time, technically underage, and my parents were old-fashioned types, real sticklers for the rules. If they found out what I'd been doing, there'd be drama, and lots of it. But somehow, when my dad stuck his head around my door all bleary-eyed to make sure he knew where I was, he didn't seem to smell anything. I don't know whether this was because he was too tired and freaked out about the alarms to notice, or that he noticed and actually just didn't care, but either way, he told me to go into their bedroom and stay with my mom until he could give us the all-clear. So my dad goes downstairs, I'm assuming with pistol in hand, and gets to work clearing the house, as well as checking the front and backyards to make sure that there's no one hiding in the darker areas out there. He comes back up, tells me and my mom he couldn't find anything and it was probably just a false alarm, and then we all head back to bed. Or rather, they went back to bed. I just went back to being a diplomatic genius on Civ 6. About an hour goes by and I start getting pretty tired, so I get up to close my bedroom window before heading to bed when the alarm goes off again. Once again, my dad goes downstairs, does a sweep of the grounds floor and the yards, then comes back to tell me not to worry and that he figured it was just the wind or something. I mean, it had been a pretty windy night, which honestly suited me because it meant the breeze aired my room out. Like I said, it was an old house, so it wasn't out of the question that the wind could have rattled the doors or windows and set the alarm off. The point being that both me and my dad were chill about the alarm going off. Neither of us thought there was anything to worry about. So the next morning at breakfast, my dad is going through the alarm system's app on his iPhone, checking out some of the data readouts from the night before. All of a sudden, he's all like, "Okay, that's weird. Apparently the backsliding doors were open 14 times last night." Number one, I was impressed the alarm system was so sophisticated that it could feed him that kind of info. I guess he shelled out big boy cash for that thing. But number two, how could it have been open that many times? Then I'm not kidding, like 5 to 10 minutes later, there's a knock at our front door, and it's the neighbor guy from the house down the street. He asks us if we had any intruders over the previous night, and we tell him no, or that at least we didn't think so. It's then that he tells us that he actually caught someone on a security camera trying to break into his house, that the dude had tried to jimmy a lock or something before looking right up into the camera before getting spooked and bailing. We assumed that this is about the time that he moved on to our house, then kept at it when he realized it was the weaker target. That seriously freaked me out. The whole time I'd been sitting there, innocently playing games, sipping stolen scotch, there had been a guy trying to get into our house, maybe only 6 or 7 feet below me. If I'd have bothered to look out the window at any point and directly downward, I'd have locked eyes with the guy. He must have smelled my cigarette smoke, known someone was home, and it just didn't bother him in the least bit. He was more than prepared to face off with someone, although apparently not when he'd seen my dad with his pistol, sweeping the house and yards in the dark. I've always liked a scary story or a good horror film. Ghosts, vampires, werewolves, they're my jam. I've never found, serial killers or whatever to be that scary, though. I didn't think that the human element to the horror was particularly potent. After that night, though, that all changed. It struck me how evil and predatory human beings can really be. How that guy had been creeping around in our backyard for basically hours right under my nose, and I'd had absolutely no clue he was there. It's how he managed to just disappear when the alarm went off, too, and how he had the balls to come back once we'd all gone back to bed. He was like a ghost or something, just vanishing into the darkness. Think about it. My dad had checked out the backyard, tried to make sure that there was no one hanging around, hiding out in the dark spots underneath the trees, and there had been. There had been someone there, just watching my dad walking around in his slippers or whatever he had on, just waiting for him to call off the search before creeping back up towards the house. Just thinking about it now gives me shivers. And now that I'm back in Cali writing this, I always make sure that all the windows and doors of my dorm are locked, and that I double or triple check whenever I think something bad is about to go down or whatever. Because sometimes it seems you'll never know if someone is just lurking in the shadows until it's way, way too late.